If you're considering getting the new Oura Ring 4, you're likely to fall into one of two categories. One, you're a new user and you're checking out different smart rings and smartwatches. Or two, you already own an Oura Ring 3 and you're looking to upgrade. Today we'll therefore scientifically answer two questions. One, is the Oura Ring 4 a good health and sports tracker in general? And two, should you upgrade if you already own the Oura Ring 3? We will do this by systematically testing the new Oura Ring 4 using different reference devices and by comparing these results to dozens of other smart rings and smartwatches. Now before checking those results, let's first briefly discuss what is different about the Oura Ring 4 compared to the Oura Ring 3. Honestly, the differences aren't huge. The only difference I really care about is the new smart sensing technology. Oura says that the Generation 4 ring automatically adapts to the user's unique physiology. According to Oura, this technology ensures continuous and accurate data collection by finding the best signal path, even if the ring shifts on your finger. If this is true, this would make the ring quite a bit better than Generation 3, since before I always tried to make sure that the sensors were correctly aligned to the bottom of my finger, but it would often still shift around. Even with the new Generation 4 ring, I still tried to align it correctly because it probably still helps with performance. However, this is actually quite frustrating with the Oura Ring 4. With the Generation 3 right here, I could select a model that had a flat top, so that made it really easy to align. The Generation 4 ring, however, is perfectly round and only has a small indentation on the bottom, which I find frustratingly hard to feel. Now, the design of the Oura Ring 4 has also changed on the inside with a fully round interior shape and recessed sensors aiming to enhance your comfort when you're wearing it. It's actually still not perfectly flush on the inside. Yes, it's definitely less noticeable than with the Generation 3 ring, but honestly I don't really care either way, but I'm also not very sensitive to these things. I'd be curious to hear if others have experience with this, so feel free to share your feelings in the comments below. Now, the improved sensor technology also increases the battery life, with the Oura Ring 4 now lasting up to 8 days on a single charge, but this is honestly a small difference from the 7 days of the Oura Ring 3. One thing to keep in mind with smart rings compared to smartwatches is that the size is fixed, so make sure you get the right size. The whole process is very similar to previous Oura Ring models. You get a free sizing kit which has plastic versions of each of the sizes. I would recommend trying the final size for at least a full day and night and make sure you're trying it under different conditions. I found that during certain sports or when sleeping in a warmer room, my fingers get swollen just a little bit and a size I thought was right initially wasn't very comfortable in the end. But to summarize, the main difference between the Oura Ring 4 and Oura Ring 3 is the new smart sensing technology, which supposedly improves the tracking performance of the Oura Ring 4. So let's see if this is actually true. Let's start with looking at something relatively easy, tracking heart rate and heart rate variability at night. The way we will be testing the performance of the Oura Ring 4 is by comparing it to an ECG reference. Now, for 4 nights I slept with both an ECG chest strap that can accurately measure the distance between each heartbeat, and I compared that to the measurements of the Oura Ring 4. You can see that I at least slept close to 8 hours for this first night, with the measurements of the Oura Ring in red being very close to the measurements of the reference device in blue-green. So that's looking very good. For this first 3/4 of the night or so, I had a relatively high heart rate, and then it dropped for the last quarter of the night, and both devices measured more or less the same heart rate. So that's looking very good. Only this peak right here doesn't match between the reference device and the Oura Ring. And if I remember correctly, I actually got out of bed and the Oura Ring didn't fully measure that increased heart rate, but it could actually be that the algorithm of the Oura Ring ignores anything for when you're out of bed. So in that case, it would still be correct. And for all the other nights, we see more or less the same thing. So here again, the Oura Ring in red follows along very well with the reference device in blue-green. Here again, I went out of bed and the reference device detected a higher heart rate than the Oura Ring. But again, I think the Oura Ring might intentionally remove those measurements, so it only measures the heart rate when you're still in bed. And to close off, for this third night and also this fourth night, we again see the same thing. The Oura Ring agrees very well with the reference device. Only some really high increases in heart rate aren't detected by the Oura Ring, but these are most likely moments that I went out of bed to go to the toilet. We can actually make an overview of all these results, and that's what's displayed right here. Each dot in this plot is a matching measurement between the Oura Ring on the left and the ECG chest strap on the bottom. And the black line shows where the point should be if there's perfect agreement, and the blue line shows the best fitting line through all the points. And as you can see, the blue line and the black line overall agree very well, and there's only a few points away from the black line. And if they are away from the black line, they're mostly below it, but there's actually only a few points right here below the black line. And in these cases, that means that the Polar H10 ECG chest strap detected a higher heart heart rate in the Oura Ring. So these points right here are most likely the moments I went out of bed and my heart rate increased. And I really think the Oura Ring is just not designed to detect these, but it only detects your heart rate when you're actually in bed. In general, I think this shows that the Oura Ring is very capable of measuring your heart rate throughout the night. However, what about heart rate variability, or HRV? Can the Oura Ring measure this at night? Well, that's displayed right here for the first night. Again, we have the Oura Ring in red and the reference in blue-green. HRV is actually harder to measure because instead of just measuring the total number of heartbeats, the Oura Ring needs to measure the exact distance between each of the individual heartbeats. Now, HRV is a measurement that is generally better if it's higher, so we want those values to be as high as possible, though this is very individual, so you want it to be as high as possible, but as high as possible for you. For this first night, the Oura Ring and the reference device agreed very well. During the first part of the night, I had a relatively low HRV, and near the end I had an increased HRV, so I was likely more relaxed here at the end of the night, though it could also be I had, for instance, a late meal, so my body was still digesting this, and it took a really long time for my heart rate to actually drop and my heart rate variability to increase. But regardless, both the Oura Ring and the reference device were able to pick up on this. Also, for this second night, we see a very good agreement between the reference device and the Oura Ring. That's also what we see for the third night and also the fourth night. So overall, also for HRV, we seem to see a very good agreement between the Oura Ring and the reference device. But again, let's make an overview plot for this. So this is a similar overview as before, but now for HRV instead of heart rate. And in general, there's just a very good agreement between the polar H10 ECG chest strap along the horizontal axis and the Oura Ring along the vertical axis. Yes, there is some deviation, mostly here in the higher HRV range. So in the lower HRV range right here, almost all points are very close to the black line. But in the higher HRV range, there's a bit more deviation. And this would be good enough for me to get a general impression of my HRV values throughout the night. The heart rate and HRV tracking of the Oura Ring 4 actually looks quite good. But is the Oura Ring 4 worth an upgrade compared to the Oura Ring 3? Well, the quality of the actual heart rate and HRV measurements was already very good with the Oura Ring 3. So if there is an improvement there, it's relatively minor. However, there is potentially one difference. The main improvement appears to be that there's less missing data now. I'm relying on quite old test results for the Oura Ring 3, so I'll take updated measurements over the next few weeks, but let's take a look at those results. So these are the results for the Oura Ring 3. They are from quite a while ago, so from the end of 2021, so 3 years ago by now. So I'm not sure if the algorithm actually changed in that time, but what you can see is that there seem to be more missing values for the Oura Ring. So there's some missing values right here for this night. Also, this night right here had a big missing section in this area right here. This night looks a bit better, but again, some missing data here. And also this fourth night, as an example, had a lot of missing heart rate data. So the Oura Ring 3, at least based on these examples, appears to have more missing data than the Oura Ring 4. But I would like to test both again at the same time with the same firmware, or at least the most up-to-date firmware for both. But let's now take a quick look at HRV. So here we have again the Oura Ring 3, but now measuring HRV. And you can see that there's indeed more missing measurements in red. So we see a big gap right here. But in general, because the lines are not connected, that means each time there was a missing value right there. Also for this night right here, a lot of missing HRV data here in the middle. This night looks a bit better with only minor missing values. And this night right here is a little bit newer, but still from 2022, so quite old. So as I said, I'll retest the Oura Ring 3 somewhere in the next few weeks or months. I need to make a second account and I probably need to pay for that. But after I'm able to do that, I'll share those results as well. But this matches with what Oura claims, is that there will be less missing data with the Oura Ring Generation 4 compared to the Oura Ring Generation 3. This to me indicates a potential relatively small improvement of the Oura Ring 4 over the Oura Ring 3, though it is technically still probably significantly better. The question is if this improvement would actually lead to any real-world differences to anyone using the Oura Ring. And honestly, I doubt it. I would be happy enough with my Generation 3 ring in basically most scenarios, though given the choice, of course, I would still pick the Generation 4 over the Generation 3. But let's now make things a lot more difficult, and let's take a look at the heart rate tracking performance of the Oura Ring 4 during exercise. Now, as we've seen in previous testing, the form factor of a ring doesn't appear to be ideal for heart rate tracking during sports. I'm not sure if the signal is more noisy, the blood flow in the fingers is harder to measure, or if companies just don't have enough experience with this technology yet. Regardless, I haven't used any smart ring yet that could track my heart rate accurately during exercise. With the Oura app, you can track 5 different types of exercises: outdoor running, outdoor cycling, indoor cycling, and walking. So let's see if the Oura Ring 4 is the exception to the rule and if it performs better than all of the other rings I've tested in the past. And we will start by looking at what is typically at least one of the easiest exercises to track, indoor cycling. But this overview actually doesn't look very promising for the Oura Ring 4. Now this plot is an overview of the 18 indoor cycling sessions I did, where I compare the Oura Ring against an ECG chest strap, which is a reference from Polar. And that reference is along the horizontal axis right here, which can generally record my heart rate very accurately. And on the vertical axis right here is the Oura Ring 4. That means that if the measurements would perfectly agree, all points should be on this blue line right here. But as you can see, this doesn't look great. Yes, there is quite a density of points right here close to the blue line, but there's quite a few points here below the blue line, especially in the higher heart rate range right here. This isn't typically what you see from many other devices out there. The correlation, which is this R value up here, is also quite low at 0.5. Now the best correlation is 1.00, and 0.5 is really amongst the lowest correlations I've seen for any devices out there. But we now really need to take a look at the individual spinning sessions to see why and how the Oura Ring 4 is actually struggling. Here we have the first example interval spinning session where we see exactly what the issue is. Along the horizontal axis we have the clock time and my heart rate is along the vertical axis, with in blue-green my heart rate according to the Polar H10 ECG chest strap, and in red my heart rate according to the Oura Ring 4. So it seems that for the beginning of the spinning session, the Oura Ring 4 struggled quite a bit, detecting a way too high heart rate right here, then just going all over the place until about the middle of the ride, after which it picked up quite accurately on my heart rate. So it could be that my fingers were warming up through this time and then here it actually caught onto my heart rate, but this just isn't very good. This second spinning session actually looks quite a bit better. Quite a few of the peaks in my heart rate were detected. A lot of the dips weren't correctly detected, but this looks quite okay-ish. This third session is again quite horrible. Only here near the end did it do okay at best. Also right here for this fourth example, only near the end was it able to catch on somewhat to my heart rate. In the beginning it did really horribly. Also right here it didn't do very well. And that's more or less the general story. Near the end of the ride, sometimes it does quite okay, but in the beginning it generally tends to struggle. My thinking is that potentially, at least after working out for a bit, the blood flow to my fingers gets better and better, and at some point it can pick up on somewhat of a signal, but still this doesn't look that great. To put these results into context, we can compare them against many of the other devices I tested in the past, and you can see that in this overview right here. Along the horizontal axis is the correlation value we were looking at before, and we want that value to be as close to 1 as possible. And on the vertical axis I ordered the watches from worst to best. So the further to the right and the higher a device is, the better is its correlation with the reference device. And the Oura Ring 4 is marked in red right here. Now, as you can see, it's really towards the bottom left. So one of the worst devices out there when it comes to heart rate tracking during indoor cycling. It's actually very close to the Oura Ring 3 right here. Now, I only took data from the Oura Ring 3 from the months before I tested the Oura Ring 4, so very recent data. And as you can see, there isn't a big difference between the Oura Ring 3 and the Oura Ring 4. I suspect they perform more or less the same, and this is random variation, and both of them are honestly doing terribly. So I cannot recommend the Oura Ring 3 or 4 for tracking your heart rate while indoor cycling. As you can see, there's many better devices out there. So let's take a quick look at some of the top performers. And of course, it was difficult to read those labels, so here I've zoomed into just the watches with a correlation of 0.9 or higher. And as you can see, the best devices out there tend to be Apple Watches. Also, the Pixel Watch 3 is doing very well. Different Huawei devices. So the Whoop strap also has good health tracking similar to the Oura Ring, but in addition is also quite decent at tracking your heart rate during exercise. So for some people that might be a good alternative to the Oura Ring if you really care about sports tracking. Next, let's take a look at another exercise, which is sometimes hard and sometimes easy to track for different devices: indoor running. In total, I did 3 indoor runs with the Oura Ring 4. By the way, if you want to get early access to results and want to support the channel, I now started the YouTube memberships, which you can find in the link up here or down in the description below. I'm struggling a bit making these videos next to my day job, and having an editor really helps, but it's financially an extra burden. So if you want to help me keep making these videos, please consider becoming a member, which also includes a private Discord server. But back to the testing. Here we have a similar overview before, but now for indoor running. And honestly, this doesn't look that terrible. There are quite a few points close to the blue line now. Here in the lower heart rate range, there are quite a few points above the blue line, so still some deviation. But compared to what we saw for indoor cycling, this looks a lot better. The correlation is also quite a bit higher now at 0.96. Though that correlation is a little bit deceptive now because all the points here are above the blue line, making the correlation artificially a little bit higher because it can still fit a quite good linear line through the points a little bit higher here in the lower range. But let's take a look at the runs themselves, see if we can explain this deviation right here. So here we have the first indoor run that I did, where we see that the Oura Ring in red somewhat followed along with the reference in blue-green. It's not even that great, honestly, because it quite often detected a too low heart rate, but this might be good enough. This second run actually looks a lot better here, it did quite well. It was generally able to follow along with my heart rate. And also this third session was okay-ish, but again a too low heart rate was often detected. So I was actually running a bit faster during this workout than this workout. So potentially here the cadence and heart rate were similar enough that the Oura Ring 4 got confused. And for this session they were different enough that it didn't mess up as much. So generally better than what we saw for indoor cycling, but still not very good. But we can again put these results into perspective by comparing these against many of the other devices we tested in the past. Here we have a similar overview to before, but now for indoor running. There's not that many devices in here because I only recently started testing these devices during indoor running, so there's only very few watches I actually tested for this. But as you can see, the Oura Ring 4, even though it didn't do as bad compared to the other exercise, it's still not doing great. There's many better devices out there. It does seem to be potentially a little bit better than the Oura Ring 3, which is the worst device out there. But generally, I still don't know if the Oura Ring 4 is actually good enough for tracking your heart rate while indoor running. It's really on the edge. So for indoor running, the results aren't horrible. It's basically the best I've seen up until this point for the Oura Ring for different exercises, but the results are still not good. So far, nothing is really convincing me that you can use the Oura Ring 4 or 3 for that matter to track your heart rate during exercise. As I mentioned before, you can only use the Oura Ring for 5 different types of exercises, and one of them is outdoor running, so let's see how it did for that. And I do need to mention, I tested the Oura Ring when it was rather cold outside. Sometimes I wear gloves, but sometimes I don't, so it might be influenced by that because there's just less blood flow to the fingers. But let's take a look. Here we have that overview, but now for running outside. And as you can see, this looks okay-ish at best. So definitely looks better than what we saw for cycling indoors, but not as good as we saw for running indoors. Yes, most points are close to the blue line at least, but there's quite some deviation, for instance, right here, but also here above the blue line. And even here below it, there's still quite some deviation. The correlation is also not amazing at 0.79, honestly not that great. But let's take a look at the individual runs to see how big these deviations actually are. So let's quickly look again at some example runs. Right here you can see that the Oura Ring in red wasn't able to detect many of the peaks in my heart rate, so I did many different intervals and I just couldn't keep up. This second run looks a bit better here near the end, but it struggled in the beginning. This run again doesn't look very good. Many of the peaks in my heart rate are missed. This run maybe looks okay. I don't know what you think. This looks again a bit better. And here also a bit better of results. So definitely not horrible, but it could be a lot better. Many devices do a lot better. So let's take a look at that overview with the other devices. And again, you're familiar with this type of overview by now, but now it's for outside running and we want the devices to be as far to the top right as possible. And as you can see, the Oura Ring 4 in red right here really isn't doing that well. It's again amongst the poorer performers out there, and it's really close to the Oura Ring 3 as well. So probably both of them are doing about the same. And there are many better devices out there. Again, Apple Watches are quite good. Also, my initial testing of the Coral Space 3 did quite well, but also the Pixel Watch is very good. Here we have the Pixel Watch 2. I didn't include the Pixel Watch 3, but this actually did even better than the Pixel Watch 2. So the Whoop Strap 4.0 there really outperforms the Oura Ring. And I mentioned the Whoop Strap since this is a direct competitor to the Oura Ring. But again, the best devices out there are different Apple devices, the Pixel Watch 3, and some of these other high devices right here. That was actually better than I expected originally. The results aren't that much worse compared to running inside. Still, though the overall patterns generally match between the Oura Ring and the reference device, there are enough deviations for me not to trust the results too much. Running indoor and outdoor does appear to be easier than indoor cycling for the Oura Ring to track. I suspect this is due to me holding onto the handlebars and that introduces some kind of noise to the signal compared to my hands being completely free while running. Now, one thing the Oura Ring 3 has been quite bad at is cycling outside, so let's see if the Oura Ring 4 can do any better. I wanted to record some nice Oura Ring B-roll, and of course this happened. Bruh. Yes, I'm not the smartest sometimes. But let's take a look at the actual test results for cycling outside, and those are displayed in this overview right here, and this is based on a total of 37 bike rides. And we actually see pretty poor agreement between the reference device and the Oura Ring 4. Yes, there are some points here close to the blue line, but this big cloud of points right here is actually deviating quite a bit from the blue line. This really doesn't look that good. It appears that quite often the Oura Ring just keeps detecting the same heart rate around 120 BPM, no matter what my heart rate was in reality. So if we look for instance right here, where in reality my heart rate was 150 BPM, there's quite a few moments when the Oura Ring still detected about 120 BPM. The correlation is also quite low now at 0.5, again similar to what we saw for cycling indoors, but honestly this looks even a bit worse. But let's take a look at those individual bike rides to see how bad this actually is. Here we have the first bike ride I wanted to share with you, and you can see quite clearly that the Oura Ring in red keeps detecting a heart rate around 120 BPM no matter what happens. We see the same thing more or less for this bike ride, though a little bit of a lower heart rate here near the end, and it seems to be biased to detecting 120 BPM. Also right here, at least varying between 135-ish and 100 BPM. Also right here again, around 120 BPM. And so on. This just doesn't look very good. This bike ride is actually a little bit better here near the end maybe, but overall this really doesn't look very good. I'm not sure what's going on here. I don't know how Oura thinks they actually measured my heart rate here. This just isn't good. But again, let's put these results into perspective. And as we've come to expect in this overview, the Oura Ring 4 really isn't doing well for outside cycling. It's really close again to the Oura Ring 3 right here, and both of them have a correlation between 0.4 and 0.5, so not very good. Also, the Galaxy Ring did about the same as these two rings right here. So a ring as a form factor, this doesn't appear to be that good for heart rate tracking, especially during outside cycling. But let's zoom in again to look at some of the better performing watches. So right here we have just the devices with a correlation of 0.8 or higher. Again, the Whoop strap is pretty good, not amongst the absolute top performers, but maybe good enough for many of you. And as we've come to expect, Apple Watches are really good, also the Pixel Watch 3 and also some Huawei devices. So it really depends on how important outside cycling is for you. And in general, as always, if you want the most accurate heart rate tracking during any type of exercise, an ECG chest strap is generally the best option. So that looks really bad. For me, this isn't good enough in terms of heart rate tracking. I don't know what you think. It's probably because I have to hold on to the handlebars quite tightly when cycling outside, and this appears to deal the death blow in terms of heart rate tracking performance for the Oura Ring 4. Most of the time it just keeps detecting a relatively stable heart rate, even when in reality my heart rate is steeply increasing or decreasing. It's better than random, but not by much. So overall, not looking very good for the Oura Ring 4 in terms of sports tracking. It honestly doesn't appear to do any better than the Oura Ring 3, but let's take a look at all these results at once. By the way, quick side note.
All right, it's another day, another bike. The other one is still broken, but I wanted to say one more thing about the Oura Ring. By now, there's also an option for other sports in the app. I don't know what would actually be tracked accurately. I'll actually ask Oura, and if I get an answer, here will be Rob now explaining that.
Hi, Rob from the future here. So I was recording some B-roll and I actually now clicked on this option of other workout. If you click on other exercise, you can basically select from many exercises now. You can see some of them right here. So it's no longer just those 5 exercises, but you have many options. Still, those 5 are showing as the first ones, but it appears that Oura did make it a priority to give you that option to do other exercises. Still, I don't think that would improve the heart rate tracking performance, but back to past, Rob. And here we have that overview of all results for heart rate tracking at once, where we have the different sports along the horizontal axis right here. So from spinning to biking to indoor running and outdoor running. And the correlation value we were looking at before is now along the vertical axis right here, where each dot is a single device for a single exercise. And I've marked the Oura Ring 4 always with a red line and a red dot. And as you can see, the Oura Ring is always amongst the lower devices out there. Now you also see 2 numbers. The first is that correlation value, and the second is a percentile. That percentage basically indicates how many devices are worse than the Oura Ring 4. So for instance, this 4% means that 4% of the devices did worse than the Oura Ring 4 for spinning, and 96% did better. Or right here, for biking, 18% did worse. That means that 82% did better. Now for running indoors, we saw before it didn't do as terrible. So 36% of devices do worse than the Oura Ring 4, but it also means that 64% did better. And again, also for running outside, it really isn't very good. Only 14% of devices did worse, which means that 86% did better. So overall, really not looking good for the Oura Ring when it comes to heart rate tracking while doing exercise. And we can actually compare this to the Oura Ring 3 as well. So here we have those same results, but now for the Oura Ring 3. And as you can see, this generally looks very similar to what we saw for the Oura Ring 4. It only did quite a bit worse for running indoors. But otherwise, the Oura Ring is really amongst the worst devices out there. Both the Oura Ring 3 and the Oura Ring 4. I cannot really recommend either of them. All of these results combined seem to indicate that the Oura Ring 4 can track your sleep, but is less suitable for tracking your exercise. But what about sleep stages like deep sleep, light sleep, and REM sleep? Can the Oura Ring 4 track those? Let's have a look at those results. But first, if you're finding these videos interesting, it really helps me get access to new devices sooner and helps me reach more people if you like this video and subscribe to the channel. Pressing those two buttons really makes a huge difference, and of course commenting also helps, so if you have a moment I would really appreciate it. But back to the testing. Here is an overview of the sleep stage test results for a total of 6 nights. To test the sleep stage tracking performance, I compared the Oura Ring 4 against the Z-Max EEG headband, which can actually measure my brain waves. Now this device also has its limitations, especially when it comes to detecting awake time, but it will give us a general impression of the sleep stage tracking performance of the Oura Ring 4. Now on top are the sleep stages as recorded by the Z-Max EEG device, and on the left are the sleep stages as recorded by the Oura Ring 4. Now each column right here sums to 100%, meaning that we can see what percentage of each of the sleep stages according to the Z-Max was predicted as each sleep stage by the Oura Ring 4. And if they perfectly agree, all values on the diagonal right here should be 100%. Now, first of all, we see that about 70% of what was deep sleep according to the EEG device was also deep sleep according to the Oura Ring, so that's pretty good actually. And if there was any confusion, this was mostly with light sleep at about 25%. Light sleep agreement is actually very good at about 80%, and most confusion in this case was with deep sleep. REM sleep agreement actually seems somewhat less good at about 57%. It's not actually as bad as this indicates, but still looking pretty good. And most confusion in this case was with light sleep, but also with awake time sometimes. Now, as I said, I won't be focusing on awake time, but just for completeness, about 41% of what was awake time according to the EEG device was also awake time according to the Oura Ring 4. But let's take a look at the individual nights now to better understand what's going on here. And indeed, looking at the individual nights will help us understand it even better. And here you see the first night I wanted to share with you. On top we have the sleep stages according to the Z-Max EEG headband, with along the horizontal axis here the clock time and my sleep stages on the vertical axis. And on the bottom we have a similar plot, but now for the Oura Ring 4. And I actually made a mistake before. In that overview we're not looking at 6 nights total, but 11 nights total. And this was the first one I wanted to show you. And in purple now right here, I highlighted the deep sleep as recorded by the EEG device. And as you can see, this generally matches very well with the deep sleep measured by the Oura Ring 4. It's not perfect, but most of the deep sleep detected by the EEG device is also detected by the Oura Ring 4. And that's also what we see for this night right here. So I had 3 main deep sleep segments, and these were also detected by the Oura Ring, though it did detect some extra deep sleep right here and also in the beginning of these 2 segments. And also for this third night, it honestly looks pretty good for the Oura Ring in terms of deep sleep. And we can do something similar, but now for REM sleep, which is marked in red right here. And as you can see, I likely had 1, 2, 3, 4 main REM sleep segments, and 3 out of 4 of these were also detected by the Oura Ring. 1 was missed right here, and the Oura Ring detected some extra awake time right here. But overall, this doesn't look too bad. We can see something similar for this other night I wanted to share with you, but in this case, when I had some REM sleep here near the end of the night, the Oura Ring mostly detected awake time, so I had really poor sleep quality this night. And for this third and final example, we again see that most REM sleep actually agrees very well between the EEG device and the Oura Ring. This short REM sleep segment here was missed, and also here near the end there's some disagreement, but overall this doesn't look too bad. I just also had poor sleep quality for many of the nights I tested the Oura Ring. And we can actually directly compare the Oura Ring 4 here on the left to the Oura Ring 3 here on the right. And as you can see, their performance wasn't that different. They did best at detecting light sleep. Deep sleep was also pretty okay for both of them, and REM sleep seems to be the hardest. And again, we won't be focusing on awake time here because the EEG device detects a lot of extra awake moments that weren't really awake moments. So overall, this seems to me to indicate that the Oura Ring 3 uses the same algorithm and has similar performance as the Oura Ring 4. I should also mention I didn't test them for the exact same night, so I basically tested the Oura Ring 3 up until the point I got the Oura Ring 4, and I only took recent nights for the Oura Ring 3, so there will be some variation from night to night. But let's now compare the performance of the Oura Ring 4 to many more devices besides just the Oura Ring 3. This graph right here shows you an overview of the agreement of different smartwatches and smart rings with different reference devices. Along the horizontal axis we have the average agreement over the individual sleep stages, and on the vertical axis we have the agreement of the worst sleep stage. And the better the agreement, the more to the top right the device is. Now I have to mention this overview is slightly complicated because I use different reference devices. The device is not marked in any color, were tested against the Dream 2 EEG headband, but I cannot use it at the moment. The devices marked in blue-purple were tested against polysomnography, which is the gold standard in sleep stage tracking. And the devices marked in green were tested against the ZMAX EEG headband, the one we used in this video. So the better the agreement, the more to the top right the device is. And you can see the results for the Oura Ring 4 right here. So it appears to be among some of the better devices, but not the absolute best devices. And it actually appears to do slightly worse potentially than my previous testing of the Oura Ring 3. So the results right here for the Oura Ring 3 are not the results we're just looking at, so recent testing, but results from maybe a year or two ago. So there appears to be some difference there, but I have to mention one thing here. I recently noticed that my reference device is showing more and more issues, and that's probably why we see, for instance, that the Pixel Watch 3 is doing slightly worse than the Pixel Watch 2, but also for instance the H-Sleep Pod 4 is doing slightly worse than the Pod 3. And as you will see in an upcoming video, the Apple Watch Series 10 is also a bit lower in this graph than for instance the Apple Watch 9, 8 and 7, though don't worry, it isn't bad at all. But I think in part this is because my reference device isn't performing as well as I'd hoped, so I'm actually switching to a different unit of the same device now, hoping that I can solve that problem, because many of the devices I tested recently just do slightly worse than I expected, even though I mostly know that they use the same algorithm as a previous device, so they should be performing more or less the same. Now, of course, we expect some random variation, but the fact that, for instance, the Pixel Watch 3 is slightly worse than the Pixel Watch 2, the Oura Ring 4 appears to do slightly worse than the Oura Ring 3, the H-Sleep Pod 4 slightly worse than the H-Sleep Pod 3, and so on. This does indicate I need to solve something, because I also needed to exclude many more nights from the reference device just because something was wrong with that particular night. So hopefully switching devices will solve that. But for now, what I want to say is I don't think that the Oura Ring 4 is actually doing worse than the Oura Ring 3, as we also just saw in the comparison we were doing. So in reality, we might just need to bump it up a few percentage points. But still, overall, this confirms what we know about the Oura Ring. It's a pretty good sleep stage tracker. It doesn't do quite as well on me as, for instance, the Apple Watch, the Sleep 2 or Nukoa app, and also the H-Sleep Pod. But it's still amongst the top trackers out there, and I would say it's amongst those top 4. So Apple Watch, Sleep 2, H-Sleep and Oura are my top performers, and in the second tier of devices are, for instance, the Whoop strap, but also different Fitbit devices. So those are the only ones I would really recommend people use. So Fitbit devices also include different Pixel watches because Google owns Fitbit. So overall, this indicates to me Oura is still a very solid sleep stage tracker, but about the same as the Oura Ring 3. So if you care about sleep staging, it's probably not worth upgrading from the 3 to the 4. And if you also want sports tracking, then for instance the Whoop strap or a Pixel Watch or an Apple Watch are probably better alternatives. Now, similar to the Oura Ring, the Whoop strap has a very good app and ecosystem. So out of the 3 alternatives I mentioned, that's probably the one with the best app. But the Pixel Watch and also the Apple Watch probably have slightly better heart rate tracking especially. And the Apple Watch for sure also better sleep stage tracking. The Pixel Watch is actually comparable to the Whoop strap. So it really depends where your focus is. If you purely want health tracking and sleep stage tracking, the Oura Ring is amazing. But if you also want sports tracking, look at some of these alternatives. So the sleep stage tracking of the Oura Ring 4 is actually pretty good, as I've come to expect from Oura. Based on the data I have, I suspect it basically does the same as the Oura Ring 3. And this makes sense, as before when Oura updated the algorithms, they got in touch with me and also made announcements publicly. It's actually quite an investment to update your sleep stage tracking algorithms, since this usually involves collecting a lot of new data with both the Oura Ring and a reference PSG measurement on a lot of people, which is really expensive. But let's get back to the 2 questions we asked in the beginning. 1. Is the Oura Ring 4 a good health and sports tracker in general? And 2, should you upgrade if you already own an Oura Ring 3? Well, regarding the first question, yes, the Oura Ring 4 is great at health tracking, but it's not so good at sports and exercise tracking, at least not based on my data. If you're just interested in tracking your sleep and general health, the Oura Ring is one of my top recommendations. Oura also provides a great app that helps you interpret the data, which is very important, and it's also relatively comfortable to wear on your finger. For me, those are the main selling points of the Oura Ring in general, especially given that interpreting your sleep and health data can be quite hard, and Oura has figured out a way to present this to you really well within the app. It's useful for anyone with different levels of experience with sleep and health tracking. If you just want basic insights or dive a bit deeper, you can do both. However, if you also want to track your sports and exercises, the Oura Ring just isn't up to the task, at least not based on my testing. As I've mentioned in other videos, my preferred all-round device is the Whoop strap, since this has both good health tracking and good sports tracking. The sleep stage tracking of the Whoop strap appears to be slightly worse than the Oura Ring sleep tracking, but it's still very usable and better than much of the competition out there. Now let's address the second question. Should you upgrade from the Oura Ring 3 to the Oura Ring 4? Well, probably not. If your Oura Ring 3 still has a good battery, I don't see many reasons to upgrade. I can imagine that Oura at some point only releases some of the new features to the Oura Ring 4, which does mean that the Oura Ring 4 is more future-proof. So if I had to choose at the moment and I didn't own an Oura Ring yet, I would definitely get the 4 over the 3. But if you already own the Generation 3, I would just save your money, at least for now. You can always upgrade the moment that Oura does decide to release some features to just the Generation 4. The overall performance of the Generation 4 ring doesn't appear to be much better than the Generation 3. The main thing that will be better is that you will likely have less missing data during the nighttime measurements. So if that's something that you're prone to, that would be the main reason I would consider upgrading, and then it might be worth it. If you do decide to get an Oura Ring 3 or an Oura Ring 4, I have an affiliate link in the description below if you want to support the channel. However, I cannot offer any discount on that affiliate link, and you might be able to find a friend referral link online that does provide a discount. So I'd recommend searching for those first. If you cannot find one, using my link would be greatly appreciated. But again, if you own the Generation 3 already, don't just upgrade because the 4 is the latest and greatest. It's honestly not that different. If instead you find sports tracking important and you decide to get a Whoop strap, you still want an Oura Ring, an HCPod 4, another device, or anything at all on Amazon for that matter, even something as small as toilet paper, want to support the channel and save some money, there are different affiliate links in the description below. Now, given that you watched this whole video on the Oura Ring 4, I think you might like this video on why the Apple Watch is such a good sleep tracker, or this video on my top recommendations for health tracking. Thank you so much for watching and catch you in the next video.